Now we're getting into the boosting EQs, which I use my trusty SSL channel from Waves for. And this is because where we reduced those sort of harshness in the sort of 2-4K area, it dulled the guitars a bit, and I want to make them bright, but I don't want to make them harsh. So let's hear this off and on. Yeah, see, that completely opens them up again, and it doesn't sound harsh. Want to see how I got the guitar mix to this song? This is Shattered Glass by a band called No Sweet Dreams, and if you want to hear that song in full, the link is in the description. This is more on the down-tempo, emotional side of pop-punk and emo, similar to songs like The Quiet Things That No One Ever Knows by Brand New, but with a more modern mix and feel. So starting with the guitar tone then, and these are the main rhythms soloed. So crunchy, not too distorted, very defined, so you can still hear the note, you can hear the picking, and it doesn't blast your face off. Okay, so what did I use to get the main tone? Surprise, surprise, it's the Archetype Nolly, my favourite amp sim, especially for music like this, and I just can't seem to find one that beats it. Incidentally, if you've tried the Nolly X and you don't like it, you think this one sounds better, I'm in agreement with you. Okay, so let's go through this. So I've got the compressor on smooth here, not doing too much, but just making sure the strums are even. I've got the tube screamer on, but the drive is off, and I've pushed the tone knob to where the DI sounded bright enough that I wanted it to be. Okay, so gain literally just past the 5. I mean, if I show you how the gain works on this amp, you'll sort of hopefully see why I chose that. See, that sounds cool and driven, but in the context of the song, it was a little bit too much. And actually, if I bring that back, you'll hear that all that sort of 8, 9, 10 on the gain here mostly just introduces noise and a bit of rumble that we don't need. So there's 8, and I'll push it to 10. It doesn't really affect the tone, it just sort of adds a bit of noise. But I wanted to bring it back because it's a much more sort of emotional song. There you go, so it's defined, because it's quite a full chord, too much gain just makes it sound like noise, and you don't want that. I want the note to come through, I want it to be melodic. So whack the bass up because we're going to low pass filter it later on. And then the mids. You've probably seen this if you watch my other videos, but I always push the mids. I don't leave it like that. You know, I refine them with more strategic cuts later on with the EQ, but I want to get the amp pushing the mids forward so that I can just pull out the boxiness, and then we've got guitars that are present in a mix and don't get lost with the cymbals and the bass. I'll play around with that mid knob and hopefully you'll see why I've got it all the way up to 9 here. See, when it scoops like that, if you heard it, you heard the sort of the low end beef of the guitar come forward, and I think that's what trips people up a lot, and it did me too. It sounds beefier and fuller and thicker like that, but actually when all the instruments are in, it actually makes your guitars disappear, as the mid-range is sort of mostly where the guitars are going to be heard. And see, when I got just past 8 there, you sort of heard the mids push forward and the tone suddenly feel like it got louder. And there's a boxiness there too, which is what we're going to cut in the next step. Then I always have a decision to make about this bright switch on the left here, which is basically just a shelf. But sometimes, depending on the song, it can work really well. Other times it doesn't. See, it sounds nice, but it's just a little fizzy for me. So again, we're going to do the shelf in the next step in the EQ part. Now, if we take a look at the cab, I've got the 57 in the default position here, but I'm not using the matched cab that comes with this white amp here. I'm actually using the one that comes with the 5150. I just prefer how smooth that one is. And then I'll always experiment by turning this extra sort of 421 or the ribbon 160, but in this case, I just liked how the 57 sounded, and then nothing on the effects for the rhythms. Cool, so this EQ step I've been talking about, it looks like a lot of cuts, and I'm sure you've heard people say if you cut this many times, you had to go back and fix something, but they are very, very tiny little cuts. And I'm probably being very nitpicky here. In terms of the actual EQ curve, I'm not changing anything that drastic. If you look at this orangey yellow line here, there's not that much changing. It's still pretty flat. So let's go through what I've done. Yeah, I mean, that's the subtlest of change there. But I'm literally finding the mid-range point that was honky. So when we pushed the amp up to 9 with the previous step, this is the cut that I decided to pull out. It's far more refined, so I keep those mids, but I reduce that boxiness. And hopefully you saw there or heard that that is a very dynamic frequency, hence the dynamic part of this EQ is engaged there too. So a little bit of mids cut out around 289, 290 hertz. Pushed a little bit of that sort of 150 in there, just because if I reduce the sort of muddiness here, I don't want to lose its size, so I sort of compensate in a nicer area down there. This 1K cut is also a bit of mid-range honk, and then we've got the harshness, which the reason there are so many is because I'll cut what I think is there. Then later on when the bass comes in, that's got a bit of like clankiness around the 2K area and cymbals and stuff, I'll start to hear build up, so I'll go back and just notch a little extra bits out of the guitars, and it also helps the vocals to cut through. Really, I would have started with 1 or 2 of these and then added them as the mix goes on in the later stages. And then a roll off here, about 12K, just to get rid of that digital fizz because it's an amp sim. So let me try and group these together in terms of harshness, mid-range, bypass them, and hopefully you can hear what they're doing. Yeah, super subtle, taking that edge off. We are going to open these guitars up with the top end shelf later on. Because there's not that much distortion, it's not that kind of track, there's not that much harshness. If this was more distorted, you'd have to work a lot harder to bring those frequencies under control. Now let's try the mid-range cuts. Yeah, there is on that third note, that third chord, this 667 hertz cut, that's really important on that third note. If you listen to that again, I'll bypass it and you'll hear it jump on that third chord. Yeah, that dun 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 when it becomes really straight picking. So that's not drastic, but it's very important. Okay, into Soothe 2. This is such a cool preset, and I would recommend you try it if you have Soothe, and it's the de-digitized software amp. It's one of the newer presets. I didn't have it until I actually updated my Soothe. I always find it a little bit too crazy, so I bring the depth down, and this trim here, it actually boosts it by 2.5 decibels, so you can be fooled because it does make your guitars louder. So if you need to, turn that trim down. Yeah, see how it makes it louder? But let's hear what's actually taking away there. Just taking away some of that sort of like 3K harshness. Really isn't that apparent yet, but when the vocals are in, it makes quite a big difference. Okay, so now we're getting into the boosting EQs, which I use my trusty SSL channel from Waves for. And this is because where we reduced those sort of harshness in the sort of 2-4K area, it dulled the guitars a bit, and I want to make them bright, but I don't want to make them harsh. So I've sort of reduced them in that area so I can push them up in the 8K region. And you'll notice actually here, which the crazy thing is I boosted around 4.5K on guitars, which makes no sense. And you wouldn't normally do this, however, with the not having too much gain in there. When everything was in, it was obviously missing a little bit of bite. So I did push the 4K. And if you hadn't have cleaned it up with the Pro Q3 EQ previously, you just couldn't do a wider boost like this because it would just bring the harshness back. So let's hear this off and on. Yeah, see, that completely opens them up again, and it doesn't sound harsh. So it may have looked like overkill with those cuts, but this is what I was trying to get to. If we do bypass this EQ and go back, if you remember, there was this bright switch here on the amp, and I was choosing whether to have it engaged or not, and I decided it was too harsh, so I was going to boost it in other ways. That was the 8K boost we just saw. So let's put the bright switch on and off, and then compare it with the SSL channel EQ boost on and off. Maybe you'll agree with me, maybe you'll prefer the one in the amp. Let's have a listen. Yeah, I just hear the fizziness in that, which is why I went with this one. So let's compare it to this. To me, that does the same thing, but in a much nicer, smoother way. And I've got these filters engaged here, 12.5K, low pass, 105 high pass. These are very gentle slopes, so you can push them a bit further. The nature of the rhythm part here is that there's not much chugging or deep stuff going on. And that's more like a safety, get rid of that extra top end fizz that could happen. But so gentle, so you can do that. And just quickly, if you make music like this and you want me to mix your next song, then head over to my website, terrybeckleyrecording.com. Hit me up via the contact form. I will get back to you. Okay, now this is something new that I've been trying, and this is the Renaissance Axe from Waves, specifically a compressor for guitars and stringed instruments. It can really add good definition to the strumming, to pick, attack, and that kind of thing. And it's just one of those, you chuck it up, it either works or it doesn't. It's obviously going to make it louder, but hopefully you can hear that it's a bit more, you can make it sound a bit more aggressive. This was just a bit more defined. I wanted a bit more of that strumming. Yeah, it really brings out the accents of the strumming, the duh, 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 duh. Have another listen to that and see if you can hear it pop out when the compressor's on. I'll start with it off and I'll turn it on. And by the way, if you're doing heavier stuff, great compressor to really bring out some heavy, aggressive guitar. And then lastly, just got a bit of tube saturation on here, very little amount, 14%. Yeah, really nice saturation, very subtle, just makes it sound less in the box. Sounds like it's done on analog stuff. Let's hear those rhythm guitars in context with a whole mix. I will mute these lead parts and we will bypass everything except the tone, and we'll compare what we had with just the tone to all the EQ compression moves afterwards. See how it makes the guitars really fit in the mix well. Yeah, it really helps the guitars gel with the mix, really helps them connect with the listener, I think. Got the right amount of brightness for everything else, so they fit in the right place. Got the right mid-range, so they don't disappear with the bass and the cymbals. So that being the most important guitar part, mix-wise, we do have this Guitar Central track, which I think was recorded with sort of summing to mono in mind, and gives it that extra sort of strength when the choruses come in. And I would have kept it that way until I brought the vocals in and found that it was sort of fighting the vocals. So I pushed it out to the left, but only not the full way. So you're still getting that extra boost and beef from it, but I just had to move it slightly out. And you can't really tell when the whole mix is happening that it's in the left. What I did with this was I ran the DI through a Shep 73 emulation here and pushed the input a little bit just to give it some harmonic saturation. And then I ran it through the 14 Cali because I was kind of treating this like a quad guitar in a way. So it's a little dirtier. The hex drive is on. I pushed the drive a little bit. And then similar sort of thing, muddiness was a problem because we had the right amount in that area, I think, from the bass and guitars. So I've pulled that back a little bit. So we're not messing up the sort of low end of the track and the low mids, and then dealing with the mid-range and the harshness in the same sort of way that we did with the main rhythms. Soothe, this time just on the default setting because it gets rid of that sort of 4 to 5k hiss. Back to my trusty SSL. Slight boost to 8k here, but nothing too crazy. Again, this is a supplementary guitar part. It's not the main part. It's just to give that chorus a lift and the big parts of the song a lift. And then I have a delay happening here, which you might think is weird on a rhythm part, but it's not actually engaged. As you can see here, I've got a 25% mix, as in dry to wet mix, only for this part here in the second verse. The rest of it, it's off. But let me just show you what that extra guitar is doing then. So in the mix, I'll start with it muted and I'll bring it in. Yeah, hopefully you heard the little boost. It's not messing the frequency response of the guitars up. It's not getting in the way of anything. It's just pushing that forward. And by itself, it's quite a dirty tone. So it's just adding a bit of attitude and a bit of grit to those bigger sections. Now let's hear that second verse, what it's doing there. Yeah, so you can hear the delay on that sort of like a single note part, hence why the delay was needed. And let's listen to that second verse. Yeah, hence the delay. It adds a tail to it. It adds atmosphere to it. It's cool. And then it carries on then. We've got some stabs and it plays with the whole song then because the whole song is big for the rest of the choruses and the ending. Okay, so now we've got the solo. And what I was given was just the solo DI here. And this track underneath it, I've dropped it an octave using the little altar boy from Sound Toys just to give it thickness. It's quite tricky to get single string lead guitar stuff to sound big and not harsh. Sometimes dropping an octave is quite a cool move to try. So give it a go if you're finding that the leads are a little thin and pokey. So the leads sound like this. Yeah, so cool little creative thing having that lower octave lead in there. I did have the choice of keeping the solo DI in the middle and then using a widener on the lower octave, but this time I went for just getting out of the way of the main vocal. So we've got the proper one to the left, the octave down one to the right, just slightly. So let's go through it. We are limiting the lead first, the DI, to make sure that all notes are heard, everything is even. We don't want a lead popping in and out, especially as things move up and down the neck. Maybe that can happen sometimes where you don't really hear it, then it comes out massively when it goes up the neck, and then as it goes down again, you sort of lose it. So I want an even sounding performance. Yeah, just making sure that, obviously there's going to be a bit of dynamics in there, making sure that everything is heard. Then we can start to actually build the tone. So I used Amplitude for this one here. I haven't often used Amplitude before. This is actually a new purchase of mine. I've gone for the Rockerverb 50 orange amp here. If you notice before, we have Tube Screamer doing a similar thing, no drive, tone up higher to get it bright. And then a delay before the amp. With the delay on, it was sort of bringing each note into the next note, making it far more sort of, almost giving it like a legato kind of feel. You know, when you're picking high up the neck in these kind of guitar parts, it can sound a little bitty. So it's nice to sort of lead them in to the next note. And then when you add in the delay that I've got after the amp, that's when you get the actual ambience of the tone. Okay, so reverb on the actual amp is off. I decided to go with the delays instead of reverb. Mids are pushed quite high again. I don't want these to sound harsh and pokey. I want them to have mid-range, not in the same place that the rhythms do, but you want them to be a bit fuller. Treble at 7, bass at 8, but again, we're going to roll off the low end, the lead part anyway. Gain a little higher, it's a lead part, it's just a single guitar track, so pushing the gain a little bit higher. Again, it's not the kind of song that you want to blast people's faces off with, some kind of like shredding lead. And then the cab, we've got the 57 and we've got the ribbon 160, which is what I was talking about. The neural DSP stuff, I always turn on a ribbon just to see if it adds something good. Here it would definitely add a kind of thicker darkness to it. In fact, if I mute that 160, you'll hopefully hear what it's doing. See, much darker than a 57. And what I love about Amplitude is you can get those room mics in there, these like spaced pair that you've got. You can make them wide and get a lot of room tone in there, which is what I wanted with this kind of lead, especially with this more ambient kind of mix anyway. So then into Soothe, factory default again. This is a lead, so it's most likely that the harshness is going to be higher up around the 4-5K area, which is why that, I mean, it's obviously engaged everything from 1K all the way up, but that's where it's sort of more sensitive. And then another limiter just to make sure that this is a very even part. We don't want it dropping in and out. Then we come to the boosting EQ. I've got the cutting EQ afterwards on this one, but that's more of a workflow thing where I want to see what brightness I can get and then deal with the problems afterwards. So let's hear what we got so far. Now I'm doing a couple of different things here. Yes, I'm boosting a top end shelf like before, 8K, a slight bit, and then we're pushing sort of 2.5 to 3 kilohertz area. Although it is harsh, this is a great place for leads to pop through if it's not too painful. You know, you probably cut that from most other things, so it's a good place for the leads to live. And then this is a sort of like a secret weapon down here in the mid-range for leads. And I do this with octave parts, I do this with single string parts. I always try and push a sort of weird mid-range frequency out. And I say weird, it's not weird or pokey, it's something that helps the lead get heard without just making it harsher and brighter and louder. So if I put the whole mix in, I will focus on this boost here, this mid-range 1.45 kilohertz. I'll take it out and bring it in. Hopefully you'll hear how it pushes that lead forward in a pleasing way. So I'll put this to 0 and I'll bring it in. Funny, actually, on 0, the lead disappears. That's how important this is. And we're not doing it by pushing too much harshness and brightness and volume into the lead, so it's not fighting the vocals as much. So after that, Pro Q3, this looks crazy, but this is like when you're in the zone and you just sort of mix and EQ intuitively. So taking out the low end, not needed. Taking out a bit more, not needed. Taking out some of the lower mid-range stuff that, again, with the lead, isn't really going to do anything nice. Pushing more of that to make that lead pop more in that sort of 1.5 kilohertz region, cutting some of the harshness, rolling off the top end. So it looks crazy, but it's not that. It's not that bad. With these, you're always going to be fighting other elements. So the vocals, you need to pay a lot of attention to not getting in the way of the vocals. And then as you bring the octave down one, we're going to want to, that's why these cuts are here, because that's suddenly going to occupy the lower down frequencies. So let's start with this EQ and then bypass it. Yeah, so it's really pushing that 1.5 kilohertz boost. It's emphasizing the nicer parts of it and it's cleaning up around it, which is why I think when this EQ is on, it sounds like a much nicer boost. And then delay for some atmosphere. You could place your delay on an aux track or a bus, and I do that later on, but this is a really quick 16th note delay there with a lo-fi engaged on it. And then Saturn 2, a bit more harmonic saturation, very low down, 11%. And then a multiband. This is because it's a part that moves. It goes up quite high in one section. So this is making sure that nothing jumps out as it moves up and down the neck. Not always needed, but in this case, I thought it sounded nice. And then later on, you'll see track spacer. I'm literally, when the chorus vocals are in, I'm just using track spacer to bring down everything between 2K and 4K, which makes sense because that's where the vocals are probably going to be fighting with the leads. And then we've got this bus guitar effects track, which is CLA guitar. We've got a little bit of a stereo spread happening, the actual 8th note delay there, and then reverb set to club. Let's hear that. Yeah, see, it's not a nice full, it's not too harsh, but it's still present there. And then they want to add a bit of depth to it with this octave down track, which is going to be the same sort of settings. Look, still the same amp settings, so the same tone, same EQ here, just slightly different cuts as I'm trying to get this one and the main lead to gel together. Same sort of low end cuts here. Still need to control this area, but we're not doing that big 1K boost, dealing with some harshness there. And a bit of delay and saturation to finish it off, also going to the bus. But adding that in with the main lead, we get this. Yeah, I really like that. I think it's a cool little trick to make things sound a bit more interesting. Okay, so well done if you've made it this far, but we have the verses to think about now where there is a clean guitar in them and an acoustic track emphasizing certain parts. So let's hear that. Yeah, cool. Really nice sort of atmospheric lead, acoustic strums, and then you'll notice that this is pushed to the right because we had those notes ringing out from that guitar central track that were panned to the left, so balancing that. And if we go back to the first verse, we don't have those distorted ring outs, we have this clean track here. Okay, so clean verse, got a clipper making sure that this is all even. If you look at the DI itself, you can see we've got these big strums here, but we want to bring them in more in line with the sort of main chunk of the DI waveform, hence the clipper. So I'm shaving off those peaks, making everything a bit more consistent. And then we've got a bit of, this will be on the strum itself. I don't have split EQ. Maybe I should get it where you can affect the attack of it and leave the tail un-EQ'd effectively. But here I'm doing the same sort of thing with my dynamic EQ there, dealing with the strumming, the picking. And then again on Soothe, we're pushing it about 2K to get that same sort of thing to happen. I'm just smoothing out the DI before we get started, basically. So this is how it sounds. We're going to get a bit of saturation because we're clipping it, but without that, those big jumps that you can see in the waveform there are going to cause us a bit of an issue if we want to get like a edge of breakup tone, because they're going to push it. And it can be a cool vibe, you know, I felt like it was a bit too much. So that's why I've controlled them a little bit and then got a nice little bit of saturation from it to give that sort of edge of breakup sound. So tone-wise, we were using the Amplitube again, and a Fender Twin Reverb, which is a great fun amp to use. And I love that you can get that with Amplitube. You can get a pretty decent sounding one. Tube saturation beforehand, not engaging any overdrive. So we're just dealing with the low mids, making it bright. Then we got a bit of reverb afterwards, and a tiny little bit of chorus. So then into the Saturn II for a bit of saturation, pushing a little bit harder than the rhythm guitars. I don't want it to sound completely clean. We've also got this track provided by the band, and I love the tone of this, so I kept it. So I'm just sort of trying to vary up the vibe a little bit by adding this clean verse in there. Yeah, I mean, what a fantastic tone that is. And if I again didn't have that was sent to me and I loved it, so I kept it. If you want to find that out, I'd get in touch with the band, No Sweet Dreams, and ask them what they use. I'm sure they'd be happy to tell you. Okay, so back to this, into the Pro Q3, rolling off the low end, pushing some of that sort of more 1K area, and then a sort of harshness cut there. And the boosting EQs next, where we are pushing more of that sort of upper mid range, not trying to make it overly bright. We want everything to kick in when the proper rhythm guitars come in, so that's why we've got this. So let's hear this off and on, because this is probably the most drastic change. So let's hear these two EQs off and on, because they're probably what are making most of the difference here. We'll turn them off and we'll bring them in. Yeah, bearing in mind, when you've got a song like this where the verses are chilled out and the choruses are a bit harder, everything needs to be geared towards the impact of the main meat of the guitars coming in when the chorus hits. So I sort of find myself stripping bits back from the rhythm guitars in the verses or the clean guitars in the verses, so that when the distorted guitar hits, it's big. And then we've got some guitar verb going on too, and a bus, which is just the Bright Room big plate preset from Valhalla Room, so it sounds like this. Let's bring in that really nice tone that the band sent me. Yeah, it's starting to sound like a really nice sort of soundscape now. And then we've got this acoustic ring here. So without any of the effects, this is what we've got. Yeah, that is a really nicely recorded acoustic guitar. In terms of getting it in the mix, we have to do a little bit of stuff to it, but it sounds great from the off. So first thing that I would have done here is make it brighter, as though it sounds nice and mellow. And I wouldn't really want to make it brighter because I love how sort of depressing it sounds. The song is quite bright. That's why I had to sort of bring out some brightness so that it was still in keeping with the whole mix. But to bypass that, you probably wouldn't get much of it in there at all. Yeah, unfortunately, it just gets lost. And then when the vocals in too, so I had to bring the sort of top end out, which is why we've got 7.5K boost here, roll off the low end and push a bit of 4K into it. And a bit of more mid-range too, just under 1 kilohertz there. And then Transient Designer, I wanted to help the sustain of it a bit more and have it less spiky with the attack. You wouldn't have needed this unless you were making it bright. I mean, the sustain you probably would because you wanted to sort of bleed into the next strum, but the attack was emphasized from those top end boosts. That's why I used this Transient Designer here, and I'll show you what it's doing. Yeah, so I'm just curtailing the attack a little bit, bringing the sustain up more to make it bleed into the next note. You got to think of the whole mix here, not just what's better in solo. Then some EQ to cut, just cutting some that sort of stuff that can make acoustic sound a little boxy when it's in a whole mix. Some more brightness, got the proper air band engaged here, the 40 kilohertz air band on here to balance it in with the rest of the instruments of the mix. Bit of delay, only a 16 note one, so that's just going to help the sustain of it again ring out a bit more. And just a final sort of EQ, final bit of brightness, cut the harshness, cut the boxiness. So then we have this. That same verb we had for the clean guitar, the Valhalla Room, gives us the final product. So yeah, shimmery. So we get this verse. So you're probably wondering, why did I make that bright? Because I too agree that it sounds much nicer, darker, but when you bring the vocals in, I felt like they need to sit above and not in the same sort of place.
You once thought there was a lifetime where she would walk right by your side. You imagined how that feed.
See, without bringing them up and making them brighter, it would get lost with the vocals there. So lastly, we've got this acoustic strum part here, which I use amplitude on. I want to emphasize the actual strumming pattern, the rhythmic part of it, rather than the sort of feel and the chords. I haven't got this amp engaged. It's just that I've got the DI going through this acoustic simulator, and then I wanted the sort of room element of it too from amplitude. So these amps aren't on. I've got my acoustic simulator pedal going into some microphones with the room, and then we're EQing, getting rid of the low end. We just want that sort of strumming to cut through here, and that's what the compressor is going to be doing too. You can see we're slow attack, fast release, so we're trying to get the strumming part and less of the sustain out of it, making it far more attack heavy, and then pulling out some 300 boxiness, and then a bit of saturation just from the Neve channel here. I'll show you that off and on. But if you listen to the end of the song here, what's actually happening, you'll see why it needs to be more focused on the strumming and less about the actual feel. Yeah, this is where we've got a big ending happening. We've got some strings in there. We need that rhythm of the strumming to come out. But the lesson here is, I knew why they recorded this, the band. I knew what they wanted at the end of it. And having worked on loads of songs with this sort of acoustic being added into the end, right, strumming along with the main track, you want it to be bright, you want it to be crisp. So I knew I could get that sound out of it, hence the processing there. So well done for getting this far. If you want to see how I would do the guitars for a much more up-tempo modern pop punk song, then watch this video here. If you want to see other videos on mixing pop punk and emo, head over to my channel. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you at the next one.